Welcome to the theater of the eye.
Rods and cones, report to the orbital side.
How nice. We're trimming the toenails. What's that?
Optic nerve, this is the brain. What's going on down there?
The eardrum's going off! Go get help!
We're having a breakdown, we're having a breakdown, we're having a breakdown, having a breakdown, we're having a breakdown,
What else can go wrong?
Urgent Synapse on line 2. It's the sphincter.
What is going on up there?
Sega Saturn.
Hey Slayers, and welcome to the long-awaited, and I mean long-awaited and long overdue, Sega history. My favorite console, the theme of my channel, the Sega Saturn. So let's get this started. The Sega Saturn is a home video game console developed by Sega and released on November 22nd, 1994 in Japan, May 11th, 1995 in North America, and July 8th, 1995 in Europe. Part of the fifth generation of video game consoles, it was the successor to the successful Sega Genesis. Saturn has a dual CPU architecture and 8 processors. Its games are in CD-ROM format, and its game library contains several ports of arcade games as well as original games. Development of the Sega Saturn began in 1992, the same year Sega's groundbreaking 3D Model 1 arcade hardware debuted. The system was designed around a new CPU from Japanese electronics company Hitachi. Sega added another video display processor in early 1994 to better compete with Sony's forthcoming PlayStation. The Saturn was initially successful in Japan, but failed to sell in large numbers in the United States after its surprise May 1995 launch, 4 months before its scheduled release date. After the debut of the Nintendo 64 in late 1996, the Saturn rapidly lost market shares in the US, where it was discontinued in 1998, having sold 9.26 million units worldwide. The Saturn is considered a commercial failure. The failure to release a game in the Sonic the Hedgehog series known in development as Sonic X-treme has been considered a factor in the console's poor performance. Although the Saturn is remembered for several well-regarded games, including Nights into Dreams, the Panzer Dragoon series, the Virtua Fighter series, its reputation is mixed due to its complex hardware design and limited third-party support. Sega's management has been criticized for its decision during the system's development and discontinuation. Released in 1988, the Genesis, known as the Mega Drive in Europe, Japan, and Australia, was Sega's entry into the fourth generation of video game consoles in mid-1990. Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama hired Tom Kalinske as president and CEO of Sega of America. Kalinske developed a 4-point plan for sales of the Genesis, lower the price of the console, create a US-based team to develop games targeted at the American market, continue aggressive advertising campaigns, and sell Sonic the Hedgehog with the console. The Japanese board of directors initially disapproved of the plan, but all 4 points were approved by Nakayama, who told Kalinske, "I hired you to make the decision for Europe and the Americas, so go ahead and do it." Magazines praised Sonic as one of the greatest games ever made, and Sega's console finally took off as customers who had been waiting for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System (SNES) decided to purchase a Genesis instead. However, the release of a CD-based add-on for the Genesis, the Sega CD, known as the Mega CD, outside of North America, was commercially disappointing. Sega also experienced success with the arcade games in 1992 and 1993. The new Sega Model 1 arcade system board showcased Sega's AM2's Virtual Racing and Virtua Fighter, the first 3D fighting game which played a crucial role in popularizing 3D polygon graphics. In particular, Virtua Fighter garnered praise for its simple 3-button controller scheme with strategy coming from the observed difference between characters that felt and acted differently rather than more ornate combos of two-dimensional competitors. Despite its crude visuals with characters composed of fewer than 1,200 polygons, Virtual Fighter's fluid animation and relatively realistic depiction of distinct fighting styles gave its combatants a lifelike presence considered impossible to replace with sprites. The Model 1 was an expensive system board, and bringing home releases of its games to the Genesis required more than its hardware could handle. Several alternatives helped to bring Sega's newest arcade games to the console, such as the Sega Virtual Processor chip used for virtual racing, and eventually the Sega 32X add-on. Development of the Saturn was supervised by Hideki Sato, Sega's director and deputy general manager of research and development. According to Sega project manager Hideki Okamura, the project started over 2 years before the Saturn was showcased at the Tokyo Toy Show in June 1994. The name Saturn was initially only the code name during development. Computer Gaming World in March 1994 reported a rumor that the Sega Saturn will release in Japan before the end of the year for $250 to $300. In 1993, Sega and Japanese electronics company Hitachi formed a joint venture to develop a new CPU for the Saturn, which resulted in the creation of the Super H RISC engine, or SH2, later that year. The Saturn was designed around a dual SH2 configuration, according to Kazuhiro Hamada. I don't know how to say his name, I'm sorry. Sega section chief for Saturn development. During the system's conception, the SH2 was chosen for reasons of cost and efficiency. The chip has a calculation system similar to a DSP, digital signal processor, but we realized that a single CPU would not be enough to calculate a 3D world. Although the Saturn's design was largely finished before the end of 1993, reports in early 1994 of technical capabilities of Sony's upcoming PlayStation console prompted Sega to include another video display processor, VDP, to improve the system's 2D performance and texture mapping. CD-ROM based and cartridge-only versions of the Saturn hardware were considered for simultaneous, I can't say that word for some reason, simultaneous release, you know what I mean, simultaneous, I know how to say it, released during the system's development, but this idea was discarded due to concerns over the lower quality and higher price of cartridge-based games. According to Klinsky, Sega of America fought against the architecture of the Saturn for quite some time, seeking an alternative graphics chip for the Saturn. Klinsky attempted to broker a deal with Silicon Graphics, but Sega of Japan rejected the proposal. Silicon Graphics subsequently collaborated with Nintendo on the Nintendo 64. Klinsky's Sony Electronic Publishing's Olaf Olfason and Sony America's Mickey Schloff. Why do these people have sons? Schloff had discussed development of a joint Sega/Sony hardware system, which never came to fruition due to Sega's desire to create hardware that could accommodate both 2D and 3D visuals, and Sony's competing notion of focusing on 3D technology. Publicly, Klinsky defended the Saturn's design. Our people feel that they need the multiprocessors to be able to bring to the home what we're doing next year in the arcades. In 1993, Sega restructured its internal studios in preparation for the Saturn's launch to ensure high-quality 3D games would be available early in the Saturn's life, and to create a more energetic working environment, developers from Sega's arcade division were asked to create console games. New teams such as Panzer Dragoon developer Team Andromeda were formed during this time. In January 1994, Sega began to develop an add-on for the Sega Genesis, the Sega 32X, which would serve as a less expensive entry into the 32-bit era. The decision to create the add-on was made by Nakayama and widely supported by Sega of America employees. According to the former Sega of America producer Scott Bayless, Nakayama was worried that the Saturn would not be available until after 1994, and that the recently released Atari Jaguar would reduce Sega's hardware sales. As a result, Nakayama ordered his engineers to have the system ready for launch by the end of the year. The 32X would not be compatible with the Saturn, but Sega executive Richard Brudovic Leonard pointed out that the 32X would play Genesis games and have the same system architecture as the Saturn. This was justified by Sega's statement that both platforms would run at the same time and that the 32X would be aimed at players who could not afford the more expensive Saturn. According to Sega of America research and development head Joe Miller, the 32X served a role in assisting development teams to familiarize themselves with the dual SH2 architecture also used in the Saturn, because both machines shared many of the same parts and were preparing to launch around the same time. Tensions emerged between Sega of America and Sega of Japan when the Saturn was given priority. Launch. Sega released the Saturn in Japan on November 22nd, 1994 at a price of 44,000 yen. Virtua Fighter, a faithful port of the popular arcade game, sold at nearly 1-to-1 ratio with the Saturn console at launch and was crucial to the system's early success in Japan. Though Sega had wanted to launch with Clockwork Knight and Panzer Dragoon, the only other first-party game available at launch was Wanshi Connection. Fueled by the popularity of Virtua Fighter, Sega's initial shipment of 200,000 Saturn units sold out on the first day. Sega waited until the December 3rd launch of the PlayStation to ship more units. When both were sold side by side, the Saturn proved more popular. Meanwhile, Sega released the 32X on November 21st, 1994 in North America, December 3rd, 1994 in Japan, and January 1995 in PAL territories, and was sold at less than half of the Saturn's launch price after the holiday season. However, interest in the 32X rapidly declined. 500,000 Saturn units were sold in Japan by the end of 1994 compared to 300,000 PlayStation units, and sales exceeded 1 million within the following 6 months. There were conflicting reports that the PlayStation enjoyed a higher sell-through rate, and the Saturn's system gradually began to overtake the Saturn in sales during 1995. Sony attracted many third-party developers to the PlayStation with a liberal $10 licensing fee, excellent development tools, and the introduction of a 7 to 10 day order system that allowed publishers to meet demand more efficiently than the 10 to 12 week lead times for cartridges that had previously been standard in Japanese video game industry. In March 1995, Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske announced that the Saturn would be released in the US on Saturday, September 2nd, 1995. However, Sega of Japan mandated an early launch to give the Saturn an advantage over the PlayStation. At the first Electronic Entertainment Expo E3 in Los Angeles on May 11th, 1995, Kalinske gave a keynote presentation in which he revealed the release price of US $399, including a copy of Virtua Fighter, and described the features of the console. Kalinske also revealed that due to high consumer demand, Sega had already shipped 30,000 units to Toys R Us, Babbage's Electronics Boutique, and Software, etc. for immediate release. The announcement upset retailers who were not informed of the surprise release, including Best Buy and Walmart. KB Toys responded by dropping Sega from its lineup. Sony subsequently unveiled the retail price for the PlayStation. Olaf Olafsson, the head of Sony Computer Entertainment America, SCEA, summoned Steve Race to the stage, who said $299 and then walked away to applause. The Saturn's release in Europe also came before the previously announced North American date on July 8th, 1995 at the price of $399.99. European retailers and press did not have time to promote the system or its games. hammering sales, the PlayStation launched in Europe on September 29th, 1995. By November, it had already outsold the Saturn by a factor of 3 in the United Kingdom, where Sony had accumulated £20 million of marketing during the holiday season compared to Sega's $4 million. The Saturn US launch was accompanied by a reported $50 million advertising campaign that included coverage in publications such as Wired and I don't know what that other one is. Early advertising for the systems was targeted at a more mature audience than the Sega Genesis ads. Because of early launch, the Saturn had only 6 games, all published by Sega, available to start, as most third-party games were slated to be released around the original launch date. Virtual Fighter's relative lack of popularity in the West, combined with a release schedule of only 2 games between the surprise launch September 1995, prevented Sega from capitalizing on the Saturn's early timing. Within 2 days of its September 9th, 1995 launch in North America, the PlayStation, backed by a large marketing campaign, sold more units than the Saturn had in the 5 months following its surprise launch, with almost all of the initial shipments of 100,000 units being sold in advance and the rest selling out across the US. A high-quality port of Namco's arcade game Ridge Racer contributed to the PlayStation's early success and garnered favorable media and compositions in comparison to the Saturn's version of Sega's Daytona USA, which was considered inferior to its arcade counterpart. Namco, a longtime arcade competitor with Sega, also unveiled the Namco System 11 arcade board based on raw PlayStation hardware. Although the System 11 was technically inferior to Sega's Model 2 arcade board, its lower price made it attractive to smaller arcades. Following a 1994 acquisition of Sega's developers, Namco released Tekken for the System 11 and PlayStation, directed by former Virtual Fighter designer Seiichi Ishiya. Tekken was intended to be fundamentally similar, with the addition of detailed textures and twice the frame rate. Tekken surpassed Virtual Fighter in popularity due to its superior graphics and nearly arcade-perfect console port, becoming the first million-selling PlayStation game. On October 2nd, 1995, Sega announced a Saturn price reduction to $299. High-quality Saturn ports of Sega Model 2 arcade hits Sega Rally Championship, Virtual Cop, and Virtual Fighter 2, running at 60 frames per second at a high resolution, were available by the end of the year and were generally regarded as superior to competitors on the PlayStation. Notwithstanding a subsequent increase in Saturn sales during the 1995 holiday season, the games were not enough to reverse the PlayStation's decisive lead. By 1996, the PlayStation had a considerable larger library than the Saturn, although Sega hoped to generate interest with upcoming exclusives such as Nights in the Dreams. An informal survey of retailers showed that the Saturn and PlayStation sold in roughly equal numbers during the first quarter of 1996. Within its first year, the PlayStation secured over 20% of the entire US video game market. On the first day of the May 1996 E3 show, Sony announced a PlayStation price reduction to $199, a reaction to the release of the Model 2 Sega Saturn in Japan at a price roughly equivalent to $199. On the second day, Sega announced it would match this price, though Saturn hardware was more expensive to manufacturers. Okay, so that appears to be the end of it. At least like the end of the main story and things, and I don't want this video to drag on too long with like really unimportant things, so I think you know all you need to know. So I hope you enjoyed this Sega history. We only have 2 more left after this. We only have Dreamcast and Pico, so that's only 2 more. I just revealed that we had Pico, but yeah, I guess you can know we only have Dreamcast and Pico. So until next week, see you Slayers. Okay, I'm sorry for the little jump cut. I'm actually not gonna end this video. Okay, I thought the world of Hayao Nakayama because of his love of software. We spoke about building a new hardware platform that I would be very, very involved with, shape the direction of this platform and hire a new team of people and restructure Sega. That to me was a great opportunity. Despite the launch of the PlayStation, Saturn's sales of 16-bit games and consoles continued to account for 64% of the video game market in 1995. Sega underestimated the continued popularity of the Genesis and did not have the inventory to meet demand. Sega was able to capture 43% of the dollar share of the US video game market and sell more than 2 million Genesis units in 1995. But Kalinske estimated that we could have sold another 300,000 Genesis systems in the November/December time frame. Nakayama's decision to focus on the Saturn over the Genesis, based on the system's relative performance in Japan, has been cited as the major contributing factor in this miscalculation. Due to long-standing disagreements with Sega of Japan, Kalinske lost most of his interest in his work as CEO of Sega of America. By the spring of 1996, rumors were circulating that Kalinske planned to leave Sega, and a July 13 article in the press reported speculation that Sega of Japan was planning significant changes to Sega of America's management team. On July 16, 1996, Sega announced that Shoichiro Iramajiri, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that Japanese name, had been appointed chairman and CEO of Sega America, while Kalinske would be leaving Sega after September 30th of that year. A former Honda executive, Iramajiri, I think that's how you say it, we're just gonna call him I guess, had been actively involved with Sega of America since joining Sega in 1993. Sega also announced that David Rosen and Nakayama had resigned from their positions as chairman and co-chairman of Sega of America, though both men remained with the company. Bernie Stoller, a former executive of Sony Computer Entertainment of America, was named Sega of America's executive vice president in charge of product development and third-party relations. Stoller, who had arranged a 6-month PlayStation exclusivity deal for Mortal Kombat 3 and helped build close relations with Electronic Arts while at Sony, was perceived as a major asset by Sega officials. Finally, Sega of America made plans to expand its PC software business. Stoller was not supportive of the Saturn due to his belief that the hardware was poorly designed, and publicly announced at E3 1997 that the Saturn is not our future. While Stoller had no interest in lying to people about Saturn's prospects, he continued to emphasize quality games for the system, and subsequently reflected that we tried to wind down as clearly as we could for the consumer. At Sony, Stoller obsessed the localization of certain Japanese PlayStation games that he felt would not represent the system well in North America, and advocated a similar policy for the Saturn during his time at Sega, although he later sought to distance himself from this perception. These changes were accompanied by a softer image that Sega was beginning to portray in its advertising, including removing the Sega screen and holding press events for the education industry. Marketing for the Saturn in Japan also changed. The introduction of Sega's Sageta Senshiro, played by Hiroshi Fujioka, legendary, as a character in a series of TV advertisements starting in 1997. The character would eventually star in the Saturn video game. Yeah, he's the greatest, probably one of the greatest Sega characters next to Saturn herself. Temporarily abandoning arcade development, Sega aimed to head Yu Suzuki, yes, legendary, another legendary head at Sega, probably like in third, began development several Saturn exclusive games, including a role-playing game in the Virtua Fighter series, initially conceived as an obscure prototype, The Old Man and the Peach Tree, and intended to address the flaws of contemporary Japanese RPGs, such as poor non-player character artificial intelligence routines. Virtua Fighter RPG evolved into a planned 11-part, 45-hour revenge epic in the tradition of Chinese cinema, which Suzuki hoped would become the Saturn's killer app. The game was eventually released as Shenmue for the Saturn's successor, Dreamcast. So we're not going to cover, let's see, we're not actually going to cover, we're going to cover the decline, but we're not going to cover, the next part we'll go on to talk about Sonic Extreme. He's getting his own video, we're ignoring that for now, but decline. From 1993 to early 1996, although Sega's revenue declined as part of an industry-wide slowdown, the company retained control of 38% of the US video game market compared to Nintendo's 30% and Sony's 24%. 800,000 PlayStation units were sold in the US by the end of 1995 compared to 400,000 units, in part due to an aggressive price war. The PlayStation outsold the Saturn by 2-1 in 1996, while Sega's 16-bit seller declined marketability. By the end of 1996, the PlayStation had sold 22.9 million units in the US, more than twice the 1.2 million units Saturn sold. The Christmas 1996 3 free pack, which bundled the Saturn with Daytona, Virtua Fighter 2, and Virtual Cop, drove sales dramatically and ensured the Saturn remained a competitor in 1997. However, the Saturn failed to take the lead after the launch of the Nintendo 64 in 1996. Sales of the Saturn and its games were sharply reduced, while the PlayStation outsold the Saturn by 3-1 in the US in 1997. The 1997 release of Final Fantasy VII significantly increased the PlayStation's popularity in Japan. As of August 1997, Sony controlled 47% of the console market, Nintendo 40%, and Sega only 12%. Neither price cuts nor high-profile games releases proved helpful, reflecting decreased demand for the system worldwide. Saturn shipments during March to September 1997 declined from 2.35 million to 600,000 versus the same period in 1996. Shipments in North America declined from 800,000 to 50,000 due to Saturn's poor performance in North America. 60 of Sega of America's 200 employees were laid off in the fall of 1997. I thought the Saturn was a mistake as far as hardware was concerned. The games were obviously terrific, but the hardware just wasn't there. Bernie Stolar, former president of Sega of America, giving his assessment of Saturn in 2009. As a result of Sega's deteriorating financial situation, Nakayama resigned as president in January 1998 in favor of like I said, Stolar subsequently acceded to president of Sega of America following 5 years of generally declining profits. In the fiscal year ending March 31st, 1998, Sega suffered its first parent and consolidated financial losses since its 1988 listings on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Due to a 54.8% decline in consumer product sales, including a 7.4% decline overseas, the company reported a net loss of 43.3 billion yen, $327.8 million, and a considerable net loss of 35.6 billion yen, US $269.8 million. Shortly before announcing its financial losses, Sega announced that it was discontinuing the Saturn in North America to prepare for the launch of its successor. Only 12 Saturn games were released in North America in 1998. Magic Knight Rayearth was the final official release compared to 119 in 1996. The Saturn would last longer in Japan. Rumors about the upcoming Dreamcast, spread mainly by Sega itself, were leaked to the public before the last Saturn games were released. The Dreamcast was released on November 27th, 1998 in Japan, and on September 9th, 1999 in North America. The decision to abandon the Saturn effectively left the Western market without Sega games for over 1 year. Sega suffered an additional 42.881 billion yen considerable net loss in the fiscal year ending March 1999, and announced plans to eliminate 1,000 jobs, nearly a quarter of its workforce. Worldwide, Saturn sales includes at least the following amounts in each territory: 5.0 Oh, dude, 5.75 million units in Japan, surpassing the Genesis sales of 3.58 million there. 1.8 million in the United States, 1 million in Europe, and 530,000 everywhere else, with lifetime sales of 9.26 million units. The Saturn is considered a commercial failure, although its install base in Japan surpassed the Nintendo 64, 5.5 million. Lack of distribution has been cited as a significant factor contributing to the Saturn's failure, as the system's surprise launch damaged Sega's reputation with key retailers. Conversely, Nintendo's long delay in releasing a 3D console and damaged caused to Sega's reputation by poorly supported add-ons for the Genesis are considered major factors allowing Sony to gain a foothold in the market. Okay, so that's the end of the Sega Saturn, officially this time. Last time I just had to cut because I had to move a place, but I thought I was going to end it, but nah. Okay, so, I was going to say next, like I said, is Dreamcast and Pico. That's what's next. Next will come Dreamcast, then Pico, then probably the end of the series. I'm not going to say the end of the series because I do want to bring it back. Like I said, there's going to be specific games and stuff that gets its own, like, little thing, but the series as a whole is probably like the big console series. That's gonna be over. I might cover things here and there, but until next week when we cover our second to last console, Dreamcast. See ya, Slayers.